In 1905, Altoona fog rolls through the yards. A brakeman reaches for a slick grab iron atop a moving freight car. One misstep, and he becomes debris beneath wheels that never stop turning. That year, 9,703 souls were killed on American railroads. 86,000 more were broken, not by a single catastrophe, but by a system that made dying routine. The rulebook promised otherwise. On paper, the Pennsylvania Railroad's rules read like a bulwark against chaos. Rule 14 reads, engine men and train men must be familiar with the construction, operation, and requirements of air brakes. Brakes must be applied at proper points to control speed on descending grades and released promptly when required. Rule 212 reads, cars must not be coupled or uncoupled while train is in motion, except by direction of conductor or engine man. When coupling, stand clear of track until cars come together. Link and pin must be ready before cars approach. The language is absolute, must, shall, utmost care. Every clause promises order, discipline, and safety, as if the right sequence of words could hold back disaster. Yet these rules were drafted in offices far from the yards. Rulebooks demanded that employees exercise the utmost care consistent with the prompt and safe movement of trains. They insisted on obedience, but left the margin for error razor thin. The mechanics of coupling and braking, tasks that meant stepping between moving cars, trusting a pin not to shear, or a brake line not to burst, were reduced to a handful of directives. The rulebook assumed every car had a working air brake. Every coupler would lock. Every man would remain alert through the 13th hour of his shift. In reality, a single missed step on a roof walk, a moment's hesitation in the killing zone between cars, or a hand slipping on a rain-slick grab iron could turn a routine operation into a fatality. The official text never accounted for slack action jolting a train, or for mismatched equipment that forced men to improvise. The rules projected confidence, but the yards ran on something else entirely. A knowledge passed in hushed warnings, not printed clauses. As the system pressed for speed, the gap between what was written and what was lived grew wide enough to swallow thousands. The next disaster would prove just how little paper could protect. In the yards, survival was a language spoken quietly, passed from one set of calloused hands to the next. Brakemen learned early that the rulebook could not catch a falling man or warn of a shifting car. Instead, they relied on a code built from experience, short, sharp whistles, a tap on the shoulder, a glance held a second too long. A raised fist meant the slack was about to run in. A flat palm signaled danger on the roof walk. In the fog of Altoona, words did not always carry, so gestures became lifelines. New hires were paired with veterans, not for formal instruction, but for shadowing through the night, watching where boots landed and how fingers curled around cold iron. The most important lessons were never written down. If a car shuddered, you learned to brace before the jolt. If the air brake hissed wrong, you watched the old heads for the cue to jump clear. These rituals were a curriculum built from loss. Every missing finger, every empty bunk, another warning folded into the next shift. Crews spoke in riddles, half jokes masking the fear. Don't let the slack find you sleeping. Or, the killing zone has no favorites. With mismatched equipment and exhaustion dogging every move, these signals and stories became the only real shield. The company's rules might demand obedience, but in the dark between cars, it was whispered knowledge that kept a man alive, if he was lucky enough to hear it in time. Slack action is the silent force that stalks every freight train. It is not visible, but it is always waiting, an invisible charge running through the line of cars. Each car is linked by heavy couplers and a steel pin, but these connections are not rigid. There is play, sometimes 6 inches, sometimes more, built into every joint. When an engineer eases off the throttle or brakes suddenly, that slack snaps tight or lets go, sending a wave of motion down the train like a whip. One moment, cars are coasting in loose formation. The next, they slam together with a jolt that can crush a man or throw him from the roof. Draft gear, the shock-absorbing mechanism inside each coupler, is supposed to cushion these blows, but the design has limits. If the force is too great, or if the pin is worn or brittle from years of use, the system fails. The pin shears, the coupler cracks, or the shock travels unchecked through the train. Brakemen learn to read the rhythm of the cars, to sense when the slack is about to run in or out. They time their steps by instinct, not by any written rule. A foot placed a second too late, caught in the gap as the cars come together, means a lost limb or worse. No one measures the exact force of these jolts in the yard, but every man knows the feeling. The way a boxcar lurches underfoot, the sudden violence that can turn a routine roof walk into a fight for survival. The rulebook never mentions the pin's breaking point or how to brace for a slack run in on a dark, rain-slick night. It is a test repeated with every shift, and the only warning comes from the steel itself, a groan, a shudder, a split second before the blow lands. A roof walk is little more than a plank, sometimes 6 inches wide, nailed atop a boxcar's curved back. The wood, soft from years of rain and summer heat, holds a thin crust of coal soot that never quite scrubs away. In winter, frost and ice coat the surface, turning it into a trap slicker than glass. Brakemen balance on these strips, 30 feet above the rails, as the train snakes through the yard. Their boots hunt for grip, but friction is fickle. On a dry day, the rough grain might buy a second's purchase. Add coal dust or a film of oil, and the coefficient drops so low that a single misstep means a slide into darkness. Hands search for grab irons, iron bars bolted to the car's edge, cold and sometimes loose. The wind claws at a man's coat, and every lurch of the train threatens to tear him free. Slack action, that invisible surge in the couplers, can buckle the car beneath his feet with no warning. A sudden run-in of slack throws the whole roof into motion, snapping ankles or hurling a body sideways. There is no room for hesitation. The gap between cars, the so-called killing zone, yawns open with every jolt. 1 foot short, and a man is caught, crushed by 30 tons of rolling steel. No rulebook can teach the feel of a roof walk under frost, or the way a car shudders before the slack runs. Survival depends on reading the surface, feeling the tremor in the boards, trusting the memory of every slip and near fall. Each shift is a wager, balance against gravity, instinct against accident. On this narrow path, the body is always one breath from the void. Profit, not prudence, set the tempo in the railroad offices. Company ledgers tallied every dollar spent on repairs, every hour a train sat idle for inspection. Memos from Philadelphia to Altoona mapped out budgets that favored output over overhaul. A worn coupler might stay in service for weeks if the numbers worked. A leaky brake hose was patched, not replaced, when freight deadlines loomed. Schedules were drawn tight, with crews swapped like parts, one shift bleeding into the next to keep cars moving. Every delay triggered a chain of fines and warnings, pushing foremen to cut corners and crews to gamble with fatigue. The system rewarded speed, not safety. Maintenance crews learned to stretch parts past their breaking point, and yard bosses weighed injury payouts against the cost of new equipment. In this arithmetic, risk became routine and accepted overhead, invisible on the balance sheet, but paid in flesh and bone. Congress stepped in with the blunt force of law. On March 4, 1907, the Hours of Service Act became the first federal limit on the workday for railroad crews. The statute capped duty at 16 consecutive hours, with at least 10 hours of rest before another shift could begin. Lawmakers pored over casualty tables from the Interstate Commerce Commission, the numbers stacking up in black and white. thousands killed and tens of thousands maimed year after year. In hearing rooms, union men described engineers nodding off at the throttle, brakemen missing signals in the 14th hour, and exhausted firemen collapsing beside open furnaces. The act was a direct answer to these stories, a legal recognition that human endurance had a breaking point. Companies protested, warning of delays and lost profits, but the evidence was undeniable. Fatigue was killing men as surely as any broken pin or runaway car. For the first time, the law drew a line in the timetable, forcing the system to account for the limits of flesh and bone. In the killing zone between cars, one lapse, a single slow thought meant death. Today, as automation pushes efficiency, the system still tests the limits of human attention. Industrial progress never erases risk, it shifts it. The real question is, how much danger are we willing to build into our everyday lives? Subscribe for more investigations.